I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
Well, that was U.S. President Donald Trump making a 1-minute video message. I don't know what you can call it in Washington today. The vast majority of people were protesters. I'd call them peaceful protesters, and a certain number, I'd say maybe it was in the low hundreds, scaled the Capitol building, and then another number, let's say it's in the dozens, broke in. I think there's a spectrum of misconduct. I think some of them would rightfully be called rioters. Whether or not they are actually Trump supporters or agents provocateurs, I do not know. Some of them had masks on, some did not. I find the whole thing very disconcerting. Joining us now via Skype is our friend Joel Pollak, Senior Editor-at-Large at Breitbart.com. Joel, I'm talking to you while things are still going on. This interview will not air for a couple more hours, so the situation is very fluid. Give me your thoughts on it so far.
Well, it's completely unacceptable, and it's been my position that the president should never have called this protest, should never have backed the effort to stop the certification of the Electoral College vote. I supported the president fighting during the period before the Electoral College voted. That's the appropriate time to raise legal challenges and call for recounts, and I thought he was fully within his rights to do that. Once the Electoral College cast its ballots, however, that was the end. That was December 14th, and the president needed to concede then. I think he's lost a tremendous amount of moral authority over the last few weeks. I think he lost an opportunity to focus on the issues in the Georgia Senate elections, which Republicans have now lost. They lost both of those Senate seats. They lose control of the Senate. Democrats now take full control of both sides of the Capitol. They will basically have all three branches of government with the ability to appoint judges, maybe even expand the number of judges, as they have been talking about doing. And I think that today's events were unnecessary. There was no real discretion that Congress had to stop the electoral vote from being certified. And although I've written an entire book about why I think this election was neither free nor fair, the remedy that is being proposed, or that was proposed, is also neither free nor fair. And that's one of the reasons I have said that this result, however wrong, should stand. And sometimes it's just like that. Sometimes there are things that happen that are not fair, and we have to improve the system. But today was a disaster, and the United States will survive the events of today, obviously. But what's also interesting to me is Joe Biden went on national television and gave an address. Apparently, President Trump had already recorded that message by the time Biden called on the president to say something. So once again, Joe Biden just a little bit late. And the other thing he's late about is denouncing political violence. This is not the first time we've seen political violence or an attack on an American legislature. In 2011, after the Tea Party victories in the midterm elections that year, where they took over several state legislatures and governors' mansions, we saw the left and the media get very excited when left-wing protesters stormed the Wisconsin state capitol and occupy it for several weeks. And that's when this all began. The tolerance of political violence by the left and by the media has gone on for a decade. And people like me have been warning over and over again that this tolerance for political violence was going to lead to disaster. And eventually, some people on the right got the idea from watching people on the left do it for a decade, and especially over the last year, that this is actually an effective way to pursue their political agenda. Why wouldn't they think that? Leftists rioted all over the United States and they won the election. So there are some extremists, completely condemnable, but this is what happens. They got the idea that this is our turn to use violence, and they did. And it's completely unacceptable. I think that President Trump needs to be held politically accountable for it, because this was a protest he called, he supported, he organized. I think, and I've taken the same line with Democrats. When you are behind a protest, it is up to you to make sure that the protest is safe, that it's lawful, that groups that want to cause trouble are excluded from the protest. And that's the standard I've held the left to. It's the standard I've held Democrats to with Black Lives Matter riots. And I'm holding Republicans and the president to the same standard here. This is unacceptable to have a protest that breaches the barricades, attacks Capitol Police, smashes federal property, occupies the Senate chamber, occupies offices. I mean, this is unacceptable, and it's united the country against the president. So it had the opposite effect of the one intended. I mean, you have been talking to me for 5 years about Donald Trump, and I always enjoy our chats about it. And you know I support the president, and I have supported him, and I've supported his policies. But I do not support him on this. And I think that this is a really sad day for the United States. It's one we'll recover from, but it's one that can only really serve as an opportunity for rebuilding if both sides acknowledge that political violence is unacceptable. We haven't really seen the left understand that yet. And I think that, for Joe Biden to go on TV and say, this is not how we do things, et cetera, this is how they did things. They did this for the last year. So I don't think he has credibility. I think there are people with credibility who perhaps need to be given more time and attention. Some people in Washington. I've been particularly proud of Republican Tom Cotton, who went out there with a statement, not just about the violence today, but a few days ago saying that the Constitution really didn't allow Congress to decertify the Electoral College result. And that was brave, and he got a lot of vitriol from some people on social media and so forth, and the president criticized him. But I think that it is time for reasonable people who care about the Constitution, care about the country, and care about the world to assert their views in public conversation and not to allow the media to continue to play this game. I mean, yesterday, when there were police officers who were dropped from charges, the Kenosha, Wisconsin prosecutors decided not to charge police officers in the shooting of Jacob Blake. Remember that? That triggered riots back in August. The media made it into a racial event. It wasn't a racial event. It was an examination of the evidence. The media keeps stoking these kinds of conflicts, and it's time for those of us who see the Constitution for what it is and see it clearly and see that the American people love it and support it to stand up and not to allow the media and partisans on either side to continue to stoke these conflicts and these attacks on the Constitution.
Donald Trump has 2 weeks left. The phrase lame duck president, there couldn't be a lamer lame duck after last night's defeat in Georgia and today. I think you're correct. Donald Trump is a fighter at his core, and I think he kept fighting probably too long. But let's put aside Donald Trump because he's done.
Right.
And what I fear is that this doesn't just mark the end of the Trump term. And I regard myself as one of Trump's biggest boosters in Canada, which doesn't say much. There's only 2 of us, me and Conrad Black. But I fear that this is not just an unflattering ending to what was actually an extraordinary term as a president. I think he was truly a great president in many ways. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about that this is a starter pistol for terrible things. Donald Trump talked last summer, about labeling Antifa a terrorist group. He said he would do that. He never did that. I'm worried that the Democrats will now label conservatives terrorist groups, that you will see more censorship of right-wing groups than ever, that Breitbart.com, that Rebel News, that anyone to the right will now be subject to a completely unleashed partisan FBI and deep state like never before. I think that this is, and I don't know who the people were who actually broke in, whether they were Trump supporters or agents provocateurs, I don't know. But it doesn't even matter because the truth will take weeks to come out and the narrative is already set. I think this is absolutely the media's perfect way to negate their violence of the last year with the incredible images we see coming out of Capitol Hill. The violent ones are on the right. We've always said the domestic terrorists are on the right. Trump's people are the violent ones. We have to crack down on the Second Amendment like never before. We got to crack down on right-wing speech like never before. Like you're going to see an assault on the First and Second Amendment like never before. You're going to see the total rebranding of the right as terrorists, maybe even a new Patriot Act kind of. I think you're about to see the absolute worst thing.
I think it's possible. I don't want to get into that mindset. I think that defeat, although something obviously to be avoided and resisted, is liberating in some ways. It allows you to throw out old ideas, to replace old leaders, and to think about how to provide the leadership the country needs. I think that if Democrats try that, there will be a pushback that continues, and it's going to continue from me and from other people. I don't feel in any way implicated in this violence. And again, I can show chapter and verse, date and month and hour when this sort of thing was tolerated and encouraged by the media when the left did it. I think also there are many of us who've managed to advocate for the views of Trump supporters without getting mired in some of this other stuff. And I think we have to have faith that we can do that. We have to have faith that we can stand up for the principles while rejecting the way some people abuse those principles, or the way people purport to be advocating for freedom of speech, but in fact are carrying out violence, like as happened at the Capitol today. But why would they have gotten that idea? I mean, 2 years ago, when the Democrats didn't want Brett Kavanaugh to be confirmed as Supreme Court justice, they stormed through the Capitol, attacking senators and elevators and so forth. I mean, this is the problem. The left and the media have tolerated political violence and intimidation for so long. And that's really where we need to go. There has to be a reciprocal answer to any attempt by the left to do this. So I don't know. I think we're going to be okay. And I think that partly because I hope it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I choose not to accept that as a possibility, as something. I mean, it's a risk, but I don't think it's. I wouldn't attach a high degree of probability to it, only because I intend it not to happen. So I think really the future is in our hands, and that's what every defeat really has to allow you to feel. My bias is toward things that give me greater freedom of action. So I felt pretty terrible on Tuesday night when the results from Georgia came in, but I woke up Wednesday morning feeling pretty good. Not because I'm happy that Republicans lost, but just because you've got to have a way forward. And I think there are many good ways forward for conservatives and Republicans. And this event today, unfortunately, does make it harder. It does make it harder. But I think that with a possibility of a kind of national reconciliation, perhaps, where there's a bipartisan condemnation of political violence. Maybe Democrats will realize it's wrong now that the right did it. I'm not saying that justifies it by any stretch, because many of us have been saying this for a decade, that they should never have tolerated it in the first place. But perhaps Democrats will come to their senses on some of this stuff. You can't call Antifa peaceful protesters when they attack federal officers in Portland. You can't call rioters on the White House lawn, or in Lafayette Square, rather. You can't call them peaceful protesters when they beat up journalists like my colleagues at Breitbart. You can't do that anymore, because you see obviously that it's wrong when the other side does it. So maybe it's kind of a moment for Democrats to look in the mirror as well. I'm confident that the future is bright. I just think that today obviously is a rather dark day for America.
Well, gee, I sure hope you're right. I see a difference between the right and the left. There's a phrase I've heard on the left, diversity of tactics. I don't know if you've ever heard that word. It's a phrase that has a special meaning. It means the left is united and they never criticize each other. Some people are journalists, some people are professors, some people are politicians, some people are fundraisers, some people are violent. It's a diversity of tactic, and everyone has their role on the left, and you never criticize the other people doing their own thing if it's pointing in the same direction. The right is not that way. So the way you've spoken here about completely disowning this and hoping for a peaceful way forward, I don't know if not just grassroots or journalistic leftists, but I don't know if Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and AOC and Ilhan Omar have that in them. I think they say, aha, this is our Reichstag fire. We have the cause, we have the motivation, and now we have the means. We will be brutal, we will transform America, and we won't waste a minute. I fear that the magnanimity and the goodwill that you've just expressed, not a sore loser, but a happy go forward guy on the losing team, will not be met. I think you'll see a sore winner who will be brutal. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's all I see right now. Last word to you, Joel.
Well, Andrew Breitbart, the founder of our company, believed in being a happy warrior. And he essentially was the backbone of the Republican opposition that emerged after Barack Obama took power with, for a brief time anyway, a supermajority in the Senate. He had complete control of the government. And Andrew was able to find a way forward. And I think that, frankly, Breitbart News is going to be the forum in which people discover that way forward again. It's not going to look the same as it did last time. It can't. There are good reasons for that. There are there's some bad things that also have happened that make certain things difficult. Like, for example, spending. I mean, the Tea Party was all about cutting spending, and neither party now can ever claim credibility on spending and deficits and so forth. But I think there will be other grounds for a new opposition. I won't call it resistance. I do believe in loyal opposition. I would like to see the new Democratic administration and Congress succeed, because I'm an American. I live here. I raised my kids here. I love this country. However, I think they will succeed to the degree that they cast aside their radical policies and ideas and learn what Trump showed is possible for 4 years, up to November, really, a very successful president. I think if they learn the lessons of the Trump presidency about what works in foreign policy, what works in national security, what works to juice the economy and help the poor, particularly minorities. I think that's optimistic. I feel optimistic if Democrats can learn from that, and I hope they do. However, I do also think they've learned a hard lesson, not from today. I don't want to justify today or even look like I'm justifying it, but I think that the lesson of 2020 and the message the voters sent, particularly Hispanic voters who deserted the Democrats in droves on November 3rd, the message they sent was they reject political violence. They reject defund the police. They reject the riots. That needs to be heard by the Democratic Party. Today also needs to be heard by Republicans, that you cannot continue to encourage this idea. You can believe the election was stolen, but sometimes you just have to accept the result, even if you don't like the way it was arrived at. I don't like the way it was arrived at. I don't think that fraud is the full explanation. I've written a whole book about why there were other explanations, such as the changing of the rules midway and the media censorship and the political violence and all of that. It's all a factor. And I'm disgusted by it. And I'm very troubled by the fact that the Georgia election basically used the same flawed system that it used in November. But we have to accept that some things in life aren't fair, and we have to find a way forward. And the way forward is not through the barricades around the Capitol. The way forward is through providing an opposition that responds to the needs of the American people. And believe me, if Democrats implement what they've promised to do, they're going to fail. They're just going to fail. Nothing they've proposed has ever worked. It really hasn't. Nothing they proposed in this past election has ever worked. This idea of expanding Medicare and Medicare for all and all the things that the Democrats want, they couldn't even get it done in Vermont. It was too expensive for Vermont, Bernie Sanders' socialist republic. So, this is just something that the left may have to learn by trial and error again. I hope not. I hope we don't have to go through yet another series of failed policies, more Iran deal type experiments in foreign policy. I think the opposition is stronger and actually does have a good foundation. I think it's divided right now because people are very troubled over the election. And I think Trump has some responsibility for that. Right now, I feel very disappointed in the president. I think that he really could have avoided this, and I think he could have ended his presidency on a much higher note. I don't know that it would ever have been happy, and I don't know that Democrats would ever have said, this guy actually did a pretty good job. I think they've just decided to ignore all of his achievements. But I think that, as you said, he's a fighter. This is who he's always been. As I joked on Twitter the other day, Trump is fighting this election result like a Democrat. This is what Democrats do. Yeah. When Republicans won in Wisconsin, Democrats rejected it and they stormed the Capitol. Trump used to be a Democrat. He's just doing what Democrats do, but it actually is unacceptable. And as much as I like him, and actually as much as I think he's restored the Constitution from where it was and protected it from the assault that Democrats had been carrying out for 8 years plus on our Constitution, I think this was a mistake. And I don't think Joe Biden has any moral authority to talk about it, but the authority's got to come from somewhere. And might as well come from us. I mean, why shouldn't conservatives be the ones to set the agenda? We can do that by making the national interest our interest. I think that's the best way to go.
What a pleasure to talk with you, to learn from you as we always do. By the way, I want to remind our viewers that Joel's latest book is called Neither Fair Nor Free, the 2020 U.S. Presidential election.
Hey, I've got another book coming out on Tuesday. I want to tell you.
Already? How do you crank them out? What's your next one called?
It's called How Not to Become an S-Hole Country.
Really? Are you serious?
Yeah. It comes out on Tuesday. It's another ebook. I worked on it over the winter holidays, and another one of those labors of love that just kind of poured out. And basically, I spent a lot of time in South Africa. I'm originally from South Africa. I spent a lot of time there in the South African Parliament, and I had a close-up view of South African politics. And I learned a lot that I think is now very relevant amidst the chaos and the left-wing takeover that looms. So it's called How Not to Be an S-Hole. I spell the word out in the title. How Not to Be an S-Hole Country, Lessons from South Africa. So
wow, you are a fountain. I can't even believe it. Well, that's great. I look forward to that one. Joel, thanks very much. Good luck. And I hope your calm and hopeful viewpoint is not unique. I hope it becomes the norm. I'm too scared to make that prediction right now. Great to see you, my friend. Thanks for spending so much time.
Thank you.
All right, there you have it. Joel Pollak, Senior Editor-at-Large at Breitbart.com. And I'll say the title of his new book if he won't. How Not to Become a Shithole Country. Oops, there it is. All right, looking forward to its release. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.